Mind-boggling part of procrastination isn't the lack of information. It's actually the overabundance of it.
2-minute rule,
The 2-minute rule.
5-minute rule,
the 25-5 rule,
90-minute
3-2-1 rule.
The 5-second rule always works. The problem is not the rule.
Well, I like Mel Robbins, but I have to disagree with her here. I think the problem is with the rules. Because one, there are simply too damn many of them. And two, I think all these rules tends to oversimplify the problem of procrastination and give people the false impression that somehow this catchphrase will magically solve all our problems. Unfortunately, that's simply not the case. I've been struggling with procrastination all my life. I waited 3 years to apply for business school, 5 years to switch career from engineering to business, and even for this YouTube channel, it was created in 2011. So roughly a month ago, I finally decided to confront this deeply rooted flaw of mine and set on a little research journey to find a way to systematically solve my own procrastination problem. So what I have here is a one-page cheat sheet to help you combat this issue. Much of this is actually inspired by Tim Pychyl's Solving the Procrastination Puzzle. If you have read it, a lot of this video is essentially me rehashing things you might already know. However, I do find this a little bit too academic for my taste, so I wanted to create a video on this topic with a little bit more practical spin on the concept it mentions. So in this video, I'm going to try to show you something that works for me. And to help you understand the whole message better, I'm going to break it down into 3 parts. First, I'm going to demystify why I think most people are dealing with procrastination the wrong way, and why without understanding the core issues of it, anything you do will not likely be very effective. It will be like taking painkiller to treat your diarrhea. Second, we're actually going to play a simple game, a game that Tim Pychyl actually used in his research to diagnose a specific type of procrastination that you may be dealing with, so that you can act accordingly. Finally, we're going to talk about my method, how I use this little cheat sheet I created to stop my procrastination once and for all. I wouldn't recommend skipping ahead just to watch the solution for this video, or even worse, save this video to watch later. And let's face it, that's going to be pretty ironic. All right, let's get to the video. First of all, why people are failing at the procrastination game. You see, when I first started to research on this topic, I noticed something odd. Let me show you the common definition of procrastination straight from a dictionary. Procrastination is an act of delaying tasks or actions, often to the point where it becomes counterproductive or leads to stress. And if you read enough literature around the topic, then most authors or researchers define procrastination a bit differently. See if you can spot the difference. For example, this one defines procrastination to be essentially irrational delay. People engage in this needless voluntary delay despite knowing it will have negative consequences because they're focusing on managing negative moods in the short term. Or this one, procrastination is a breakdown of self-control, where immediate urge and desire are prioritized over long-term goals and responsibilities. I mean, there are tons of quotes on definition. I'm not going to read each one, and they all pretty much say the same thing. People think procrastination, the act, triggers depression and anxiety, that our inability to do things on time causes these negative emotions. But in reality, most modern researchers suggest it was the other way around, that your negative emotions is a cause of procrastinations. You procrastinate not because you're lazy or lack of effort, but it's actually more about fear and emotional regulation. During my research, I found that the reason why we procrastinate so much actually has something to do with this tiny part of our brain called amygdala. What you can consider to be our alert system. Whenever it spots something scary, like a potential shark attack or a looming deadline, it will force our body go into a panic mode by flooding our brain with stress hormones, making you feel all jittery and anxious. And eventually, those stress hormones overpowers the prefrontal cortex, which is a part of your brain that's supposed to keep you focused and in control. I mean, sure, it may be just a deadline, and shark attack are very different things, but our brain don't always know the difference. When amygdala facing that deadline, it simply detects something unpleasant and reacts accordingly. We end up avoiding the scary task and doing something easier instead. It's like our brain's way of saying, well, no, I'm not going to deal with that right now. And that, in a nutshell, is the reason why we procrastinate. It isn't about being lazy or having poor time management. It's actually a psychological issue. It's all about how our brain reacts to stress and negative emotions. And to tackle this psychological problem, you need psychological solutions. That's why time management tricks often doesn't work here. Take myself as example. I believe I'm pretty good at managing time. After all, I work as a management consultant / project manager. It's literally my job to manage people's time. But that didn't stop me from putting off important projects for years. In fact, I'll let these world-leading researchers of the field explain it to you.
Well, what happens with procrastination? Well, I'm having negative emotions when I think about the task, and if I avoid the task, I feel better. So now I've reinforced it by getting rid of the negative emotions. Very powerful. I established a procrastination habit. That's what habits are, right? Well, I think everything about procrastination has to do with emotion. The higher your emotional intelligence, the lower your procrastination. So if you can just get in touch with your emotions and realize, yeah, this thesis is scaring the out of me, then you're more likely to harness your emotions and do something with it. I would argue, to the extent that you can manage your emotions, you'll manage your procrastination. It's a matter of being able to say, I said I'm going to do this now. It doesn't really matter how I feel. I'm going to sit down and work on it.
This is Pychyl, arguably the most renowned expert in the field of procrastination. He is a professor at Kelton University in Canada and has authored numerous books and articles on the subject. I already mentioned Tim's book, Solving the Procrastination Puzzle. He also hosts a podcast. If you're interested in his work, I recommend you check it out. Without delving too deep into his research, I'll share my key takeaway from his lectures and books that really resonate with me. Here are some important things that you need to know. Procrastination is a coping mechanism that avoids negative emotions. We feel better temporarily by putting off something that causes stress or discomfort. Second, the higher your emotional intelligence is, the lower of a chance you will suffer from procrastination. But emotional intelligence is actually something can be trained and is also related to your natural personality. Three, there are certain personalities that are resilient to procrastination and we want to have them enhanced. And there are bad ones we want to hopefully correct over time. Four, and most importantly, being too hard on yourself only layers on more negative emotions, making the task more overwhelming. When it comes to procrastination, self-compassion is crucial for breaking the cycle. So in short, procrastination isn't about laziness. It's a genuine mental struggle rooted in specific psychological dynamics. This also isn't simply a matter of putting off tasks. It's a complex interplay of emotions and behaviors. This is especially true for people with ADHD and precisely why a lot of common advice like just get started, be more motivated, just do it, basically useless. Sorry, Nike. So what do you do about it? Well, I suggest we start by playing a little game. What's this little game about? Well, it's actually related to Ali Abdaal's recent book, Feel Good Productivity. I think it's a great book based off the very same idea Professor Pychyl is advocating. And if I were to summarize this book with one sentence, it would be this. First, you need to feel good about yourself, and that leads to positive emotion, and over time, that also leads to getting more things done. So feeling good is actually the first step of this virtuous cycle. And that's exactly what we are trying to achieve with the next game I'm trying to play with you. It's called the Procrastination Personality Dynamic. Yes, I made up that name for the lack of better words, but the game itself is actually originated from a simple 6-part questionnaire Professor Pychyl used to gauge whether his research subject has tendency to procrastinate. And here's how it works. Here are 6 questions I'm gonna need you to answer. And for each question, you will need to rate how true this statement is to you. So give it a score between 0 to 10. And after you finish all 6 questions, you can use this chart to visualize whether you have procrastination personality. I'll do it with you. A full disclaimer, the only thing that I made in this is a name and the graphic you're seeing. But if you want more details, please check out Professor Pychyl's podcast and buy his book, Solving the Procrastination Puzzle. And if you're ready, let's begin with question number 1. Question number 1, typically you're considered less emotional stable than others. This means you tend to experience more frequent or intense mood swings, and you may react very strongly to stress or emotional situations. Second, typically you will say that you're very impulsive. Perhaps you often buy something very expensive you don't really need, or like say something you regret saying. Also mean you often act on sudden urges or desire without much thought or planning. Number 3, you are a perfectionist or believe significant people in your life expect you to be perfect. I don't need to look very far to find example like this. If you're like myself, I always feel like that I need to live up to my family's high expectation since very early age. So if you also feel the pressure to meet unrealistic high standards set by you or someone else, you need to pay close attention to this one. Number 4, you feel you are competent and have a great deal of self-efficacy. This is not just your confidence level. Think deep into your own capability in achieving tasks. How often do you see a task through? How often do you give up? Do you have faith in yourself that you are going to complete the thing you set out to do? This also means that you believe in your ability to successfully perform tasks and achieve goals. Number 5, you are a conscientious person. This means you are highly responsible. You are very careful and persevering. You have a great attention to details. You also take good care of yourself and those around you. Also, if you're conscientious, that also means you are likely a very well-organized, perhaps even a high achiever. And usually, you tend to have very good self-discipline. And number 6, at the very last question, generally, you feel very good about yourself. You see yourself as a positive person who brings goods to the world. This indicates a strong sense of self-esteem and belief in one's positive impact. Now, based on the answer you gave, you will end up with something like this, a hexagon with some score on it. I call this the Procrastination Personality Dynamic. And also, you will notice that I have also divided this graph in half. There's a green part, there's a red part. This is because, according to Professor Pychyl, the right region of this graph is what referred to as the procrastination risk. It's a rough estimate of how much you are susceptible to procrastination. And the green part of this graph is what he called the procrastination resilience. As you can probably guess, this counters the procrastination risk you may have on the left. Let's take my chart as an example. I'm actually at a significant risk of procrastination, primarily because I've always feared not being good enough in other people's eyes. Over time, this fear turns me into a perfectionist and dread falling short of high expectations. Also, if you look at this corner, I'm also becoming increasingly impulsive in recent years, as evidenced by a lot of unnecessary purchase ever since I earned some money in the stock market. But on the brighter side, I'm generally considered a calm person who doesn't experience many emotional swings. So obviously, your dynamic is going to be very different. I also asked a dozen of my friends to take this test, and based on my very non-scientific judgment, this seems to be a few typical type of people. And I gave these types some funny names. I'm gonna share my findings with you right here. So out of the 12 friends that I tested, 3 of them actually are this one. It's what I called the chaotic dreamer. These are people with wild mix of high emotional instability and impulsiveness, which means they are constantly bouncing between emotional highs and lows, like chasing shiny objects or new distractions. They don't feel a ton of external pressure to meet their personal standard, which means their problem is procrastination usually come within themselves. That's why I call this type of people the chaotic dreamer. The second type of people, they are not easily rattled. They can keep their cool under pressure, although they also have experienced high amount of pressure to meet high standard, whether that's from family, boss, or society. This is what we commonly call a perfectionist, but there's also a psychological spin to it. This is someone with emotional steadiness and drive to be successful, but who's weighed down by a deep fear of letting other people down and never feel like they are good enough. That right here is myself. And later in this video, I'm going to tell you how I used this information to fix my own procrastination issues. But before I do that, you should know that I have another couple of stereotypical charts. I named them all and created a cheat sheet for each one of them. And if you think you're one of them, feel free to take a screenshot or something and see if it's true or not. Or you can definitely try this test on a friend or family, give it a funny name like I did, and make them feel bad about delaying tasks. There's a good chance that I haven't covered your personality type, but the important part is, what do you do about it? But for that, you may need a healthy dose of imposter syndrome. But don't worry, I'm gonna explain everything about it after I quickly talk about this video sponsor, short form. Most of us can only read less than 50 books from cover to cover in a year. But there are over 3,000 nonfiction best-selling books being published every single year. So which 50 should you choose? And what if you want to read more but never have the time? That's where short forms comes in. It's my favorite book summary app on the market by a long margin. You might know it as a book app that provides a comprehensive yet structured summary for its vast library of best-selling books. But it offers much more than that. For example, I've mentioned this book, Solving the Procrastination Puzzle, multiple times in this video, and you can find it on short form. Not only does it offer an excellent in-depth summary, but also includes external reference not part of the original book. It's just related concepts that reinforce your learning. This feature alone makes the reading experience much enriching, and in my opinion, essential in today's world of information overloads. For longer books, short form offer concise, chapter-by-chapter summaries that retains essential contents. These summaries strikes a perfect balance, neither too long nor too short. I can honestly say I'm a great fan of its post-reading exercise and note-taking features that further enhance the reading experience. If you like to rate like myself, I truly think you should check it out. Make sure you use this link in the description to get a free trial of unlimited access and additional 20% discounted annual subscription. Alright, enough about that. Happy reading, and let's get back to the video. So what to do when your personality works against you? Now obviously, one's personality doesn't always change overnight, but there's a trick that I read about that may help you. Consider the first time you walk into a new job or get promoted to a higher position. Does your behavior suddenly change? Remember, how do you feel the first time you deliver a report to a new boss or talk to your new colleagues? Remember how you put on a mask of confidence even if you don't quite feel it inside? You might even stand a little straighter, speak with more authority, and make decisions more decisively. Remember that? In those situations, you are essentially playing the role of a competent professional you aspire to be. As you continue to act this way, you often find your performance actually improves. Your pretend confidence gradually becomes real, and your initially shaky skill become more solid. And before you know it, you're no longer pretending. You actually become the capable person you were initially just portraying. Well, I call this, for the lack of better words, the good imposter syndrome. I mean, when we're out of our comfort zones, it's human nature to shed our usual behaviors and act differently. This can feel very uncomfortable, especially when you are trying to make a change in your life or step into a new role. However, it proves an important point. We can pretend to be someone else, someone better, when the situation calls for it. And remarkably, when we repeat these new behaviors often enough, we actually become the improved version of ourselves. And let me tell you, this principle applies with procrastination as well. You can actually act against your natural tendency. If you know some personality trait might make you more likely to procrastinate, you know what personality trait you need to change. With a clear target in mind, we can now create a lot of hypothetical scenario in our mind and imagine how we can respond under different circumstances. This is how we use the knowledge of the personality dynamic to our advantage. So this cheat sheet is an example how I did it. With just a simple piece of paper and maybe half an hour of your free time, you can create a straightforward plan to craft your new procrastination-free personality. For example, based on this little game we just played, there are two areas I need to work on. Number one, stop being a perfectionist. And number two, become more conscientious. And at each one of this area, I would map out some hypothetical scenario like this. So using myself as an example, if the travel and work schedule doesn't allow for the best production, I promise myself I won't be a perfectionist and wait for the perfect moment to shoot and edit my next video idea. I will shoot that video in someone's kitchen if I have to. Or when I'm tempted to take an extra day to deliver a presentation to a client, I will ask myself, what's the worst that could happen if I do it today? If the result is acceptable, I will commit to doing it today. Conscientiousness. If I'm halfway through a task and it's harder than expected, whenever I feel the need to take a break or switch to something else, I'll do a quick checkout first. I'll summarize my current progress, how far I've come, why I'm stuck, what is a core issue, and what I can do to overcome it when I resume that task. That's actually a very good habit, whether you procrastinate or not. Let me share with you one more scenario. If I'm overwhelmed by a lot of things, instead of immediately crying for help, I will just take a deep breath and pause everything. I will organize tasks by urgency and importance, tackle the most important and urgent ones first. Then I'll figure out if there's any dependencies between tasks. Finally, I'll delegate tasks to colleagues so we can work in parallel. Do you see? The point of all this is by deciding in advance how you're going to react in these typical but hypothetical scenarios, you're less likely to fall back to the old habits. For years, I've been struggling with delegating tasks between team members and myself, and I never thought it has a connection with procrastination. I always hate working on complicated projects with a million interconnected moving parts. And I struggled and put off working with others because my personality lacked conscientiousness. With this framework, I finally have the practical way of fix this on a fundamental level. So this little cheat sheet that I prepared for myself, it has tons of these tiny scenarios that are tailored to me, from how to deal with family conversations with parents or to how to respond to boss when got questioned about work progress. I kind of just wrote a list of little script to myself. If X happen, then I'll do Y. X is what I call imposter scenarios, and the Y is what I call the promises. And the key to design the right scenario is to carefully counter the personality tendency you identify in your previous exercise. For example, if you're a very impulsive person, you need to include more scenarios in that section. If you already have self-esteem, there's really no need to create a hypothetical scenario in that category. So this graph is meant to help you figure out your weakest personality link and design scenarios accordingly, basically to create your own imposter. If you really want to fix your procrastination, be very mindful of these different scenarios in life and write them all down. Now that you understand the idea of this method, I want to give you some practical tips that I think are quite important when you apply this method. Number one is to start small but trust the process. If you watch my time management video, you will know that I have a simple philosophy called a motivation cycle. When you start a small action, it generates some progress and small results, and in turn, those results leads to more motivation and bigger actions. That philosophy applies here too. You want to work on this procrastination trick on really small and easy to achieve step first, like housework chores, university assignments, or maybe finally build that treehouse you promised your son last summer. Once you sense some changes in your own behavior, you can then move on to bigger things in life, like start your own business or whatever life goal you have in mind. Number two is don't treat this like another to-do list. So for this method, what really worked for me is decide exactly how, when, and where you're going to behave in certain ways to stop procrastination. You need to be very specific in your own planning and don't cross it off your list until you're certain that you really have made a change. There's a bunch of research by this guy, Peter Gallwieser, I'm sure I butchered his last name, found that when people use this implementation intention method, they're more likely to follow through in their plans. So basically, if you want to turn your goals into reality, don't just write them down. Plan out the specific how you're gonna make each one happen. It's like giving your brain a roadmap to success. Now, if you manage to see through this video without saving it to watch later, you deserve a pat on the back. And maybe you can even drop a like or leave a comment down below. The more likes it gets, the more time I'll invest in researching similar topics for the future videos. And obviously, procrastination is only half of the coin when it comes to getting more things done. If you are interested in this topic, I made another video talking about how I manage my time, energy, and attention as a management consultant and a top business school student. Click right here to see that video. I'll see you there.